Capcom may be in one of its best moments ever. 2026 has been banger after banger for Capcom. They started with Resident Evil Requiem in February, then they had Monster Hunter Stories 3 in March, and now we have Pragmata. You know, this game was first announced back in 2020 when Sony was announcing the PlayStation 5. This was announced at that event as a PlayStation 5 game. And since then, it was radio silence for years. Like, it seemed like the game went into development hell and it was just stuck there for a very long time before we heard about it again. And usually when a game goes into development hell, that's a pretty bad sign. That it usually means that the final product is not going to be that great. But thankfully, Pragmata is a wonderful exception. This game is excellent. The story in Pragmata begins with a group of technicians that's been called onto a research station on the moon to perform some kind of repair work. However, when they arrive, they realize that there's no one there to welcome them. The research station seems empty, and it looks like the AI that's running and overseeing everything at the research station has turned against humans and seemingly eliminated everyone. So now Hugh has to find a way to get back to Earth, and while attempting to do so, he meets Diana, a type of android called Pragmata that is seemingly unaffected by everything that's been corrupted by the AI overseeing the research station. You've probably seen Diana already, and yes, she does look like a child. And while she is technically an android, Capcom absolutely did not shy away from giving her very childlike behaviors. And so this actually creates a lot of beautiful and genuine moments between the two main characters, you know, Hugh and Diana, where Diana is learning a lot about being human, or it means to be human, or what it's like to be human, or it's like to feel things. And Hugh is sort of forming this paternal bond with Diana, which is interesting because, you know, he starts the story almost mocking his colleagues for having children in the first place. He's not interested in that at all. But his relationship with Diana develops very naturally, and it's just a lot of beautiful moments come between the two of them, both during the main story and, you know, in optional moments when you're back at your base. These two characters are one of the main draws of this game, and they make everything you do feel that much more rewarding when you have those scenes at the end of, you know, whatever is happening. It's always rewarding to see what happens next between them. But the gameplay is obviously also very important, and thankfully, Pragmata also excels in this area. The primary mechanic you probably know in Pragmata is shooting enemies. It is all the enemy encounters. But unlike a typical shooter, it's not just about shooting enemies, you know, just shooting whatever you want or trying to just find a weak spot or something. Like, it's not just like that. For pretty much every enemy in this game, you actually have to expose its weak points first. So while you're shooting and moving with Hugh using the analog sticks and triggers, the main face buttons on the controller are actually used to control Diana's hacking, where you have to navigate this grid and you have to complete this sort of puzzle to hack the enemies and expose their weak points. It's a fairly novel concept, and while it starts fairly basic, these grids evolve very quickly and are very consistently throughout the game. So it gets very complex, and you actually have to pay a lot of attention to the hacking that you're doing, because it's not just about beelining it to the end point of the hack. Each grid is populated with a bunch of extra nodes that can have different effects. You know, the most basic ones that you see from the start are these ones that extend the exposure of the weak points of the enemy. So when you're hacking, you actually have to carefully navigate to try and go through as many nodes as possible to expose the enemies for longer or deal more damage. So the game actually gets really intense on both fronts, because as you go through the game, you meet bigger and stronger enemies that take more damage to go down, but they also actually increase the size of the hacking grid, so the hacking gets more complex. But as the hacking grid increases, you also get more nodes. You find optional nodes that you can add to the grid, even the standard nodes might be in bigger numbers. But there's also bad nodes that might block your path or just make the hack fail entirely. So like, the complexity of hacking is always scaling up throughout the entire game. Everything is always getting more challenging, and you always have to keep improving. And it makes it even more interesting because all of this happens in real time. While you're hacking with Diana, you can still move and shoot with Hugh, and enemies don't stop attacking you either, so you always have to be ready to dodge attacks and move around. And this just makes battles very demanding in a way, but not overly difficult. So like, you always have to be at the top of your game to finish a battle in Pragmata, because you always have to be focused on hacking, but you always also have to be focused on moving and dodging attacks, because enemies can be pretty aggressive. So there's this duality of things you always have to be paying attention to. And every battle feels like you have to give it your all, even though they never feel overly difficult. Like in the standard difficulty mode, the game is completely manageable, but it just always feels like you have to be at your very best. Like every battle is exhilarating because you always have to optimize all the resources you have. You know, you have your weapons for you and all the hacking and the nodes and everything for Diana. Like all of this just keeps evolving all throughout the game. So you always have to just keep doing your best. When you're not battling, Pragmata still has some pretty nice mechanics too. There's a good bit of exploration that's required if you want to get all the collectibles. And by the way, the collectibles are all like labeled. Before you go into an area, you can see all the collectibles that are present there. You can see the locations, but you know what you're missing. So it makes it, easier if you do want to collect everything, you know where to go. And to do so, you have to, there's a bit of platforming almost. You have to move around, you have to make good use of your movement abilities because you can jump. You have this mid-air dash that you can also upgrade throughout the game. So as you unlock more movement abilities, you can explore more areas. And there's also sometimes a little bit of puzzle solving where using Diana's hacks can help unlock certain paths to get more collectibles. So there's like a nice mix of things that you have to actually do. Nothing is too challenging, but it never feels overly repetitive either. Like it's just nice to have that break from the combat and have it still be meaningful. So there's like a nice mix of mechanics at play here. The game also features a shelter which you can go back to every now and then to do a few things. For one, you can go here to heal. So whenever you enter the shelter, you're fully healed and your healing cartridges are also restored. But the shelter also has a lot of upgrade things. So you can upgrade your weapons and your suit and Diana's hacking and stuff like that. All of that can be upgraded at the shelter. And then as you go along, there's actually a lot more you can unlock. You can unlock new costumes. There's new mods that you can equip for your weapons or your character. Like there's just a lot of stuff that you can improve back at the shelter. So like all the collectibles that you get actually allow you to get a lot of things that you can buy at the shelter. And there's also this stuff that you can these extra moments that you have with Diana, because as you go through the main game, you'll sometimes find these things called Read Earth Memories, or REMs. And so these are basically like replicas of things back on Earth, just sceneries or objects or things like that. And you can collect them and recreate them back at the base. And so Diana kind of learns more about human experiences, and this triggers all kinds of dialogue between Diana and you, and you can just talk to Diana directly. Like you don't always have to have those memory things. You can just interact with her. There's a lot more cute moments between you and Diana that are optional by just doing this stuff back at the shelter. So you've got very unique and challenging combat. You've got a nice, mix of like exploration and puzzles. You got wonderful characters, and you got a ton of collectibles and unlockable stuff that you can get throughout the game. So Pragmata is a game that just kind of keeps on giving. It feels very complete in just like every sense of the word. It's a very rewarding game. There's always something that you can get out of it. So that just leaves performance to talk about, and I do kind of have to touch on that because I'm talking about the Switch 2 version of the game here. And I think that's an important point for a lot of people. And I have to say, it's still kind of crazy to see a game look this good and still try to hit 60 frames per second on this kind of hardware. Like, remember, the Switch 2 is a handheld. This thing is tiny, especially if you remove the controllers. All the processing power is on this tiny device, and it can render something that looks this nice. That is really impressive. It's very similar to Resident Evil Requiem in that regard, in that it looks great, but unfortunately that also means that the performance itself is a bit iffy. Like the frame rate, while it tries to hit 60 frames per second, it does get a bit unstable, and I would say actually a little bit worse than Resident Evil Requiem, especially towards the end. I will say in TV mode throughout the majority of the game, I wasn't really bothered by it. I did notice it every now and then, but it wasn't really a problem. Only at the end, in some areas, it felt like it was a little more almost stuttery, but it's still playable, but I felt like I saw more frame drops there. In handheld mode, I feel like I noticed it just more across the board, and the few times I played in handheld mode, performance seemed a good bit worse compared to TV mode, so that is worth noting. The game is still totally playable, but yeah, the frame rate could be a bit better. I wish Capcom would just kinda try to target 30 frames per second and lock it there. I think that would make the experience a little more consistent. But yeah, like it's still great that the game looks this good and runs fairly smoothly, all things considered. So with all that in mind, is Pragmata on the Switch 2 worth it? Yes, absolutely. Like, this is a phenomenal game in just about every way, and while performance on the Switch 2 is obviously downgraded a bit compared to the bigger consoles, this is still really good. Like, it runs well enough and it looks great, and just the game itself is phenomenal. And I think it's even, especially interesting because this is actually almost a budget release compared to modern standards, because the game actually came out at $60 compared to, the $70 standards for most games. And it really doesn't feel lesser than those big AAA releases in any way. Like, the game is decently long, there's a lot of content, there's a lot to do. Visually, it's a well-done game too. Like, nothing is really missing here that really justifies the lower price tag, aside from it just being a new IP. So yes, this is totally worth getting. And that is pretty much all for today. If you haven't yet, check out my previous video about why the Switch 2 doesn't really need Nintendo. Pragmata is actually one of the big reasons why I said that. Also, please consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time. Again, thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.